What's up, guys? Coach Matt here today, and we have episode 10 of the Richmond Elite podcast. And today we have Trevor Kittleson, the head assistant of Wartburg College Wrestling, the men's team. He was actually my coach in college as well, so I'm excited to have him on. He was a great mentor to me. I coached underneath of him after I was done competing as well, so he was kind of someone that I modeled my coaching after. So very, very excited to have him on. Kind of give him a couple minutes here to just talk about himself a little bit, maybe about his background, how he got into, coaching, how your athletic career kind of led into coaching and how that kind of shaped your coaching model a little bit. So Trevor, welcome to the Richmond Elite podcast, episode 10. Let's hear about it.
Morning. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely.
Um, I guess talking about how I got into coaching, I don't know. I think it was something that I always kind of wanted to do, and maybe it was because my dad was a coach my whole life. Um, but when I was deciding to go to college, I knew I wanted to coach, and so when I thought about that, I'm like, well, what's the best way to coach? And the obvious answer was to be a teacher. So
Mhm.
I threw myself into being a teacher. Decided that I wanted to major in physics because that was my favorite class at the time, and was a physics teacher at the high school level at Perry High School. Shout out Blue Jays. And um, a wrestling coach, football coach, track coach while I was there. And honestly, like, man, my time at Perry, I learned so much about my coaching career and how I wanted to coach. I had a lot of mistakes early on, and it really taught me a lot. And I had to learn a lot. I was kind of thrown into the fire a little bit, but I had a lot of good mentors there too. And without those mentors, I probably wouldn't have learned as much. But uh, that's kind of how I got started into coaching. And then I wanted to, I kind of had an inkling in the back of my mind that I wanted to see what college coaching was all about, and got the opportunity to do that. And here I am 8 years later, still in the college coaching realm and loving every minute of it.
Yeah. So how old were you when you took over that Perry job? Because you were fresh out of college or what?
I was fresh out of college. Let's see. I was, man, I don't know exact ages, I guess. I'm not thinking, but 23, 24 years old, something like that.
So how was that like coming out of college? Were you were you thinking like, "Oh, okay, I've just wrestled in college and now I can coach high school athletics. It'll be easy. Like these kids will be easy to teach and easy to learn from and blah 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 blah." Or was it like, "Oh shit, like I actually have to do this now. Like this is kind of like a nervous thing for me. It's kind of like something that I'm not too sure if I'm going to be successful at." Or was it kind of like, I know I'm going to be good at this. It's just whether or not like the situation's the right thing for me type of thing.
Uh, I think I had a little uh, blindness in that I was like, all right, let's go. I'm just gonna go.
Yeah.
Definitely, I knew wrestling, obviously, but I didn't know it at the level I needed to. I and I definitely did not know coaching and did not know how to um, build kids and all of that stuff.
Mm.
I had a couple really good mentors when I was there. One, the football coach at the time, Jason Olenczak, was a great mentor to me in learning how to interact with, I mean, parents, students, administration, everything. And then I also had a couple great assistants that had been in the Perry wrestling program for 20 years that just didn't want to take over the head job, and so that's why it was available, and I was able to take it, in Bob Gittens and JP Holgan. And those guys were Perry people in and out. They knew everybody. They knew exactly how it worked, and man, without those guys, I think I would have fell flat on my face there, to be honest.
Right. Yeah. And yes, segueing into the next thing is like when you were, competing, were you taking notes? Obviously your dad was a coach your probably your whole life and obviously still does help around with wrestling right now. But were you always kind of taking notes in the back of your head of like, okay, I want to remember this when I'm done competing and I'm coaching? Or was there someone that like, along your journey of competing, you were like, I want to be just like that coach when I'm actually done competing and into the coaching realm a little bit more?
I would love to say that I had a notebook and I was taking all these notes about what I wanted to how I wanted to coach, like,
Yeah.
but no, I was definitely not doing that. I was focused on competing. Uh, However, I do when I started coaching and I got into situations, I would lean on a lot of mentors. But also, I remembered very specific times
Mm,
uh, in my athletic career, and I'm like, oh, I've been through this with a coach before. Like, I remember kind of what to do here.
right.
Uh,
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day just because, like, I always say that you live in my head, just like your voice sometimes lives in my head because I just like, when I'm complaining about something or when something's hard or when something, doesn't go my way, it's just like instead of the angel and the devil, it's like Trevor Kittleson's in my head instead. So it's like all those little things I didn't really understand when I was competing or like almost didn't like welcome those things, but like once you're done, you kind of have a different perspective of it, and at the time, and I'm even telling athletes this now, right? Like I'm sure I'm annoying as hell to a bunch of athletes because you annoyed me when I was competing, right? Like that's just how it works. That's your job is to be that guy. But it's like I'm explaining to them like down the road, you're going to understand this a lot more. Right now, you don't get it. Like I didn't get it when I was competing, and I think that's the biggest challenge, especially with high school athletics more than college, right? Like now that I'm dealing with a lot younger kids, it's a lot different because, they play multiple sports, let's say, or they, might not have the biggest interest in their athletics right now. But at the college level, it's a little bit different, right? Like you have people that are there to compete. You have guys that are there to wrestle, right? It's a little bit easier to kind of convince them of those things, right? But what would you say is the hardest or the biggest difference between coaching high school athletics and kind of running a program that way compared to like doing a college program?
Ooh, I think that I honestly believe that being, and I'm talking wrestling here because that's what I know mostly, right? But being a high school wrestling coach and probably anything high school coach is maybe the hardest thing to do in coaching. Um, and there's different hards, just like in everything in life between college and high school. But high school coaching, you have kids that have never wrestled before in the same room as a state champion, and
Mhm.
you have to structure a practice to be able to build that kid that's never wrestled before. You have to build the middle kids to be able to get to state qualifier, state placing levels. And you still have to enhance that state champion level wrestler to keep building on himself or herself. And man, that is a hard thing to do. And I had no clue how to do that when I was coming out. There was a lot of trial and error, and I'm not saying I ended up figuring it all out, but I'll tell you what, I know 5 years into it, I was a lot better than year one into it.
Right. Yeah, it's all
Um,
about the experience for sure. Experiencing
yeah,
things.
and I don't know if you can ever be prepared. I mean, other than being an assistant for a while and going through it, and um, being under a good mentor of a coach, because you can be an assistant under somebody that doesn't really know what's going on either. And but I mean, always learning is the biggest part. Like if I'm trying something and it's not working, and I'm always trying to get better and learn, and I'm always trying to bounce ideas off of different people, um and I mean, I'm still doing that to this day. Like, you don't got it all figured out. Nobody's got it all figured out. But you try things and you bounce ideas off of different people, and hopefully that you can keep building on that and learning all the time. But the high school level is definitely something that's just it's extremely hard to do with all of those different things. And then you're also dealing with kid like the part of college is like we're just wrestling, right? Like all of our athletes are just wrestling for the most part. We have a few that end up playing football too, but in high school you got they're playing football, they're playing baseball, they're playing soccer, they're running track, they're playing golf, they're doing everything. And so like yeah, during season it's mostly about wrestling, but they're still doing some other sports stuff. Just like in other sports during season, you want them to be doing a little wrestling stuff. And so like yeah, you have your athletes that are just all about wrestling, and those are the easy ones, right? But there's just so many dynamics going on, and you need a kid that really doesn't really wrestling's not the favorite, but they're going out for it because they want to be a part of the team. They're doing it for their teammates, or they're doing it to be better at football, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
Like, there's just so many different dynamics to it, and coaching in the high school level is one of the hardest things to do, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
I feel like there's just like we just said, there's just so many outside factors with, high school athletics, right? Like, it's not as easy because, like I said, college is just solely focused on people commit to colleges for sports, like, that's why they're there, but high schoolers, it's more like you have to convince them to stay out and stay dedicated a lot more than you do college athletes, right? Like, you still have to don't get me wrong, like, in college athletics, you still have to babysit a lot, right? Like, I'm sure you still have to babysit a lot of people, but it's not the same kind of babysitting as it is in high school, and it's not like almost begging or pleading people to stay out for the sport or like grow your numbers that way, right? Like it's a lot easier to grow your numbers in college because you just recruit, right? Like it's a little bit easier to recruit than it is to mold a high school team. Especially because I feel like high school you have to build up from the base. You have to start with like club scene, and like get those kids fostered through a club scene as well. It's not just when they're with you for 4 years in high school or whatever that may be. Um, but yeah, so I guess moving on from that, it's like so you're done at Perry, right? Like you kind of are ready to move on from there. Like, was it something that you knew was going to happen, or was it more so like, okay, when the right opportunity comes about, like I'm going to leave Perry and I'm going to leave this job and move on to the next level? Or what was your kind of your thought process on that a little bit?
Honestly, everywhere I've been, I've never been like, okay, I'm gonna like be here for a bit and then I'm gonna move on. I'm like, I'm waiting for the next thing. Like, that's just not kind of how I am. I'm a all in kind of guy, and so like when I went to Perry, coming out of college, and I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anybody moving there, but I was like, this is what I'm doing. I'm here, and I'm gonna put everything into it. And honestly, I didn't think about leaving, but I had an inkling in the back of my head that, man, I wonder what it would be like to coach in college a little bit, and then an opportunity came and, I discussed it with my wife, prayed about it, and we decided to take that opportunity to go over to Loris. And um, it was hard because we had so many great people in Perry, and we had, people and kids and families that were counting on us, and that we were leaving, but um, I felt like it was the right time. It was a good opportunity for the right time for what I wanted to do, and I kind of was like, if I don't try this now, I'm probably not going to.
Right.
And I knew I could always come back to teaching and coaching in high school. Like, I knew
Yeah.
that was always going to be a thing. Um, and so, we took a leap of faith, trusted in God, and there we went.
Right. Yeah. And that's, a lot of people probably don't know like just especially because Loris is such a small, D3 school, but kind of like the process that we all had to go through in order to like make that program, you know, grow a little bit. And especially you were probably the biggest piece in that, out of the 4 years that we were there. So it's like moving on to that, it's going into a program where you kind of knew that, the record wasn't there right away, right? Like even for me transferring from Augustana to Loris, it was like, I will never forget sitting in the stands watching Augustana beat us in a duel right after I left Augie. And I was like texting my mom and my parents. I'm like, I think I made the wrong move here. Like they just lost to Augustana. This is crazy. Um, but looking back on it, like the cool like growing of a whole team and a culture and like everything like that Loris was like, how did you kind of figure out how to mold a team like that? Because a lot of it was on you, if not all of it was on you. Like I think a lot of the people on the team would probably say that. Um, so like, how did you kind of think like, okay, now I have to take this team that was 2-13 or whatever we were the year before we ended up being good, and like flip this whole culture shift around, be in a university where maybe they weren't used to winning in the wrestling realm or winning at all necessarily, right? And like kind of grow that whole culture around campus, whole culture around the team, and like just being able to like build the relationships the way you were. Kind of what was your thought process or behind the scenes work that you thought about, going into Loris like that?
Man, um, I'll go back to this again. Like, I'm an all in kind of guy, and so like when I when I went there, it was all in, go to work, start getting after it, and then I figured out pretty quick, and I had already known this a little bit, but I really figured it out then and really dove into more of kind of like this is going to be how I coach. I really feel like I figured out how I was going to coach and how I was going to even recruiting and do all that when I first began there. And I still had some learning curve. Don't get me wrong. Like again, it was a trial and error thing, but I figured out a lot of okay, this is who I am, and this is who I want to be, and this is how I want to do this. And every day I just woke up and I made the decision in the morning like this was going to be it. And that started to take place a little bit when I was in Perry. I really started to figure that out, but I think I kind of buckled down on it in my first couple of years there at Loris, and have just been riding that ever since. But going into that a little bit is number one, it's not about me, it's
Mhm.
about the athletes. My time is not about me, and I learned that even more becoming a parent then too. um, it's about the athletes, and it's about doing what's best for them at all times, and doing anything I could to help them. um, and building relationships with the guys, not just a coach, um, athlete, and that's it, like just in the room, but really building meaningful relationships. And honestly, like that's why I've enjoyed the college coaching scene a little bit more than the high school scene, even, is because I really feel like I can build those relationships even deeper at the college level. Like you think about it, you're going into college, you're 18 to 22 years old, you're on your own for the first time. Mom and dad aren't around, you're trying to figure out who you are as a man. um,
That took
just
me a
all of
while.
those
Everyone
factors.
listening to this, that took me a while in college to figure out. Trevor had to beat it into me for years, but continue anyway.
But you
Yeah,
did you did
eventually, eventually.
uh, it did, you're right, it took a little bit of just annoying you, right, like you said earlier. I
Mhm.
hope I'm still annoying to the guys on the team about the things I say. If I'm
Yeah,
not, then I'm doing my job, honestly.
yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I still hear a lot of things. I mean, I'm you now in the fact of, like, I say a lot of these things to kids, when I'm coaching them, but, um, it's always a decision, it's always a choice, everything's a choice. That's probably the one that, like, I use the most now that I hated the most when I was competing.
You
So,
hated it, and I would say it. Everybody hates it.
I mean, yeah, it's just one of those. It's like when a kid says, like, "I know you are, but what am I?" But it's like that in a coaching way, right? Like, it's just like everything's a choice. Like, "Oh, you have a headache? It's a choice." Like, if, "Oh, you don't feel good," it's a choice. So, it's kinda one of those things, but it's
Uh,
meaning works.
yeah, I mean, and I think it really helped me figure out again who I wanted to be as a coach is when I was diving into that. And the biggest thing is the relationships, and how do you build those relationships? How do you you ever heard the saying um they're not going to care about what you say until um they know that you care about them,
Mhm.
um kind of thing. And so how do you do that? And I mean, building that trust of just knowing that I'm always going to be there for you, no matter what. When I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. You can count on me. I'm going to show up when you need me to show up. When I told you I was going to show up, I'm going to do and be exactly who I say I'm going to be and do. And um, there's no, I say this and I say I'm going to do this, but then I do this. Like, it's pretty easy to see through that kind of thing. And so just being a man of my word, and being there and trusting, and then fostering that relationship. Like there's gonna be times where, oh, I'm supposed to be doing this, but my athlete needs this, and so we're gonna do this instead. And so that's kind of how I approached it, and I just approached it with like that's who I was gonna be and do every single day, and I was gonna bring energy to it too, right? Like um, you can feed out the energy, but I'm just trying to be an authentic version of of what I want and what I want to be and who I want to be, and hopefully that comes off still. Hopefully I haven't changed in that sense, but that's kind of how I started to dive in onto that, and as you say, create that culture. But mostly it was just about the caring for each athlete individually,
Mm.
um, and going about it like that. And then that's how I started to approach recruiting too. Like I couldn't do the salesman thing. Like I
Yeah.
tried to do it a little bit, and it wasn't who I was. And so I go about it like I want to create a relationship with these kids. I want to learn about them. I want to know who they are. I want to know what they like. Like that's fun to me, and going and watching them compete, and I get to go and talk to all of the coaches that I made great relationships with when I was coaching high school. That's the fun part for me, is just the relationships that you build over time, and then now going like literally yesterday, I go to a high school tournament, to go watch a little bit and talk to people and recruit a little bit. And there's 5 former athletes that are coaching in the same gym.
Cool.
And that's pretty freaking cool.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, honestly, like looking back on, you know, the athletes that you coach, like someday, I hope to kind of have that same feeling where it's like a little bit now I do, from coaching in college for a couple of years of seeing those guys that you mentored kind of step into that role that you were in at one point, right? Coming out of college, being young, being a young coach. Um, but like going back to, kind of staying true to who you are. I think that the biggest problem a lot of times with coaches is that they're not comfortable with themselves, as a person. So then they kind of project that onto athletes, or they project that onto, their coaching style or how they recruit or how they kind of handle their practices, whatever that may be. And it's like that is the complete opposite. And like you said, you can see right through that, right? Like I feel like the biggest reason why um, the Loris team ended up being so good when we were there is because like one, we believed you as a person, right? Like we believed in you as a person, not just a coach, but also that made us want to work harder, like because you were putting that effort in towards us a little bit, right? And a lot of times I think it's just a lot of, you know, coaches just say a lot of things to try to get by, but deep down they don't really care if you give them that same energy back, you know what I mean? But um like you said, we're more of like an all in. And I feel like everyone on that team was all in. And that's why it was, became what it was. And, same thing when we ended up going over to Platteville and coaching, like everything was all in, right? Like everybody was all in. Well, not everybody, but everybody was all in on the team. And um, they were able to like kind of grow that culture too in a span of what, a year and a half, 2 years maybe. So I think that's a huge, huge thing. But kind of leading me on to the next thing of recruiting, how different is it for you now? Like thinking back to when you were getting recruited, right? To like now when you're recruiting kids, just the change in just honestly a short period of time too. It's been a short period of time that recruiting's been changing, like evolving so much. NIL, like all these visit things, right? Whether it's like you get to, go to a bunch of D1 schools and get all the gear and do all the cool photo shoots, right? And like maybe a D3 college can offer that sometimes, but not every D3 college can, right? So like what's the battle with recruiting right now, especially with NIL and especially with all these D1, especially kids wanting to go D1. That's a big thing. Every kid wants to go D1, which they should want to do that. It should be their goal, obviously. But um, kind of go in depth on like how hard that battle is right now, especially with battling with bigger schools.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like especially here at Wartburg, we are recruiting the same guys that are going to the D1 level. That's the kind of level of guy that we're recruiting and that we want here at the Wartburg program. And so it is a challenge. It's always a challenge, going battling these Division 1 universities, or battling, you know, just and this landscape is ever changing, right? Especially with the NIL lately, and I think it's going to change even more here in the next year,
Mhm.
even more than it already has. And um, you know, I feel like I have a unique experience to talk about in this sense, because I went to a Division 1 school. I went to UNI. I wrestled at UNI. I had a great experience there, and now I've been I was a high school coach, and now I've been in the Division 3 for 9 years now, I guess, I believe. And so, you know, I guess the biggest thing for me, and it's hard to talk to student athletes about this because some just have a tunnel vision on that. And I think I was probably partially in a similar boat. Um, I visited a bunch of Division 3s as well, but I didn't really, I didn't have anybody talking to me on that side of things about the differences and whatnot. But um, you know, with the Division 3 level, we are still pursuing excellence in everything we do. We you can be a very, very good wrestler and you can reach all of your dreams and goals
Mhm.
coming to a Division 3, especially here like at Wartburg, right? For example, we just Masoma and Dean wrestling at the World Championships, wrestling at the NWCA All-Star Classic. Like you can do it all here,
Yep.
but you can also have a life outside of wrestling.
Mhm.
And I think that's probably the biggest thing for me. Like I have I am going to be all in on everything I do, but I also I love to coach my own kids. I love to, be a part of the community. I help coach flag football. I help coach baseball, little kids. Like we do, there's a lot of different things that are going on. And even for me specifically, right? But for also athletes, like you can have other interests in life and still um, be great at wrestling and all of the same thing at the
Yeah.
Division 3 level.
Right. Yeah, and I feel Division 3 is something, it's almost that thing that you have to experience to really understand what it's like, especially going to a small college. But I know, from personal experience, like I got letters from, Division 1 schools, but I didn't even think about that, right? I didn't even really explore that option. Like I was just more so set on the fact that I was going to go D3, um, just because that's just, kind of what I had in my head. And I feel like a lot of kids can't sacrifice like their own, ego almost, um, to go down. Like they think it's like a downgrade to go to that level. But, turning around on that fact, it's like we wrestled at the Grandview Open and I wrestled, Iowa State guys. I wrestled Iowa guys. I wrestled UNI guys. Like I'm still getting that level of competition going Division 3. And honestly, if I was at a Division 1 program, do I think that I would have ended up being a better person, 4 years later? I don't know, but probably not. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have learned the same things. I wouldn't have, gotten the same values out of it, and I wouldn't have been able to like grow, like you said, outside of wrestling. Because at some point, even though I'm still coaching wrestling right now, you're done being an athlete at some point. It's not like, oh, okay, I'm gonna be in the same mindset of compete, compete, compete all the time. And as a coach, you can't be, right? Like if you're still competing in your own head, then you're not helping your athletes, right? Like you're just competing against them. Whether it's in the practice room, you go in to like wrestle them and help them out, but you just beat the crap out of them because you're still competing in your own head, right? Like it's not beneficial for anybody to just be always go, go, go and always trying to win and always trying to be like that guy where you have to like prove yourself to people. But it's a little bit different when it comes to D3 because like you said, you can still accomplish all the things that you like want to there. It might just be a different route than you like were expecting, but it's definitely still possible. Um, but now with like Mo going to the world championships, has it been a lot easier to kind of convince those kids that were like on the brink of D1 to D3 to be like, hey, you can still come to Wartburg like and still do these things and we'll still give you that opportunity, right? Because it doesn't happen without coaches that like are willing to also put in the effort to get you there. You know what I mean? Like they have to still send you to tournaments, they have to do the travel, they have to do all that stuff, right? So is it a little bit easier now that you have that, like prime example of Mo, to use for recruiting? As far as high school kids that are trying to go either D1 or D3.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd use the word easier, but it's definitely a shining example of like, hey, this guy is at the Division 3 level and excelling at the highest level
Mhm.
in the world, right? Like it can be done. But also, if you watch this guy, like he comes in and works his butt off every day. He's always learning. There's no ego involved. There's no like, oh, I'm the man. Like he's always evolving and learning, and like I think that's what makes him so special is that and he knows the value of the relationships that he has here at Wartburg, and so I think that's been a huge thing for him too. Um, but yeah, I mean, a shining example, like we can do it all. It still comes down to you making those decisions again, making
Yep.
the decision to want to be that, right? And we are going to give you every opportunity to be able to do that. But you still have to make those decisions on your own.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And just for like a little bit of a backstory, like for people obviously probably don't know Mo, a lot of people probably watching this will not know who he is, but he obviously couple time D3 champion, and then ended up going to Wisconsin, transferring to Wisconsin for a little bit. But then, it shows a lot about Wartburg because he ended up coming back. He had the opportunity to go chase NIL. I'm sure he had opportunity to go chase, Division 1 goals that he may have. But I think ultimately what brought him back was, like you said, the relationships that he built at Wartburg with the coaching staff, with his teammates. It's hard to replicate something, and um, I don't think he was necessarily thinking like the grass is greener by any means, but a lot of people do think that, the grass is greener on the other side, or the grass is greener, and it may be a couple times, but you might jump into a situation where you're like, wow, I really regret doing this. And, um, just because he goes out and destroys everybody in D3 doesn't mean that he's not getting better. Like you said, he's still learning all the time, right? Like when's the last time that guy had a close match in D3, Um, but it's not like he's carrying himself like that whatsoever, right? He's still going out and exploring other options. He was at the OTC for a while, right? Like training out there with the best guys in the world. So it's kind of just cool to see that. And, it's really putting D3 on the map because when I was thinking back to like when I was going into college, going D3 was like looked down upon, It's like, oh, you went D3, it's like whatever. But now it's like, okay, you wrestled D3, honestly, sometimes that can be tougher than D1. Like you have a bunch of guys that just love the sport of wrestling, or they love whatever sport they're going to play at Division 3 level. They're not getting money like, D1 guys are. They're not getting sponsorships, endorsements, blah, 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 blah. Like they are just going because they love to compete in whatever sport that is. And honestly, like that makes a more dangerous athlete, in my opinion, than somebody who, you know, is able to just go and give and, everything. They still have to work hard at Division 1 level, but it's a little bit more like you're famous at that time rather than like Division 3 is more you work in the dark and no one really gives you that attention until you do something like Mo does, where they have to give you attention right before they're like forced to give you attention. um but yeah, so I guess just moving on from that, like going back to when you were considering going to like Wartburg, right, or considering going to Loris or Platteville, whatever it may be, like in your head were you thinking, wherever I go I am going to try to crush every ounce of like hope that everybody else has around me team wise? Or were you like, okay, I know this is going to be a long process, a building process, and I can't get greedy. I can't try to jump, ship a little bit faster. I have to, enjoy the mundane process of things and just be able to build a culture again wherever I went. And did you kind of use those same tactics that you used at Loris for Platteville and from Platteville to Wartburg, or were you always kind of evolving your tactics to kind of grow that culture?
I think again, going back, like always be learning and always be growing, the growth mindset type of thought process is that. And but there are things that like you don't like, this is just how we do things and this is who we are, right? Like, and
Mhm.
I think establishing that early on, especially when you're trying to build a culture from what wasn't what
Yeah.
trying to build a different culture than what was in place
Mhm.
is a big thing on that. um Coming to Warburg, the culture of expectation of excellence is here already, right? And
Mhm.
so, and personally, like I've felt that I have fit in great with that culture because, like, that's, and as you know a little bit, that's how we think about things, right? Like, I don't take, we don't allow the expectation to go down. Like the expectation is set, and we're always trying to obtain that expectation. And so it's been a great fit for me, honestly, here. But like, I think just having non-negotiables on some things, like, nope,
Mhm.
that's not how we do things. That's not where we're going to be. That's not what we're going to do. Uh, and not letting those things slide. Like obviously, there's times where things happen and you learn from them and you help athletes learn from them. But I think setting expectations and just holding to those expectations is probably one of the biggest things in building a culture, like you say. But also, I mean, I'm going to go back to what we talked about earlier. It's the relationships, like again, nobody's going to follow your leadership. Nobody wants to unless you show that it's worthy of doing that, right? And so building those relationships, caring about more than winning, like obviously the expectation is we want to win a lot of wrestling matches, but there's daily things, there's daily habits, there's everything else that goes into that that's going to help you do that. And so it's holding those expectations on a daily basis every single day. And like you talked about the mundane, it can get mundane doing those things, but like you wake up and you just make the decision and you go back to doing those things that you have committed to. I want to be at this level. Here are the things I need to do every
Hmm.
single day. And I'm just going to focus on doing those things day after day after day after day after day. And that's going to get me to where I want to go. Right. And so that's kind of how I like to think about it, and just focusing on those habits, those daily habits. But at the end of the day, again, it comes back to relationships because you can call somebody out, you can try to hold somebody to expectations, but if they know you're full of crap, pardon my language, like they aren't going to follow what you want to do, right? And so um being that trustworthy person where they know that you're going to follow through for them and you're going to follow through for everything else, that goes a long way in trying to hold somebody to an expectation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up a really good point with habits. Like I know Jared, the owner of the gym, my boss, he's gonna love this because we're dealing with a lot of times where kids will their season starts and then they stop coming to see us because they think, okay, I'm in wrestling season. I need to cut weight and wrestle. That's all I need to do. And I'm going to be the best wrestler I could possibly be if I just, focus on getting my weight down and just focus on wrestling, which at the end of the day, the thing that's going to make you the best wrestler is wrestling, right? Like there's nothing that's going to make you a better wrestler than going and wrestling. But the habits that you build outside of just wrestling are what's going to make you more successful than other people, right? Like I guarantee you, just for everyone on the record, I guarantee you Wartburg College wrestlers lift during season. I can 100% guarantee that, right? Like I guarantee you that every Division One program is lifting in season. Like I don't care what school you name. If you're not lifting in season or doing some sort of lifting in season, your team is probably not going to be very good. Like I'm sorry, that's just how it works, right? Like not saying we had the best lifting program at Loris, like don't get me wrong, but but we lifted, right? We did something, and we also went it on our own and did stuff, right? Like we had the dungeon, we had the resources for it, so we were able to do a little bit more on our own. But um, kind of going back to the habits thing, like we're trying to build habits in a lot of different athletes here, right? Like I deal with a different spectrum of athletes now. Like I have kids that are 9 years old that come here. I have college athletes. I have girls. I have boys. I have whoever it may be. And it's a lot of different personalities, a lot of different people that don't necessarily, um, you know, understand why they're here. A lot of times their parents just send them here and they're here to do that just because. But how important is building habits as in the early stages of your career as an athlete? Like for long-term development, how important do you think building habits is as a young age? Like you build habits in Dakota and Brooks and Kate right away, right? Like kids are, if you talk to Dakota, his oldest son, he has values in his head. He has a mindset already. Like he was surrounded by it, right? Like growing up around Loris, around, Platteville, around Wartburg. He's been around a lot of high level competition, lot of high level athletes. But that was also instilled from the day that, he could understand it to where he's at now. And he is so far ahead than most kids his age, like when you talk to him, even. So how important is that, starting off young and building that over time?
I think it's extremely important, obviously.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, going back to it, like if I have this goal of whatever that goal is, winning a state title for your athletes or winning a national title, whatever that may be, like that's you need to have that goal. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, okay, here's my goal. And then I need to set a list of things that I need to do on a daily basis to reach that goal.
Mhm.
And then I need to just do those daily habits over and over and over and over again. And, you know, part of, I mean, I am trying to instill obviously those thought processes into my children early on. You can change it.
Mhm.
Um, Evidence is out there. It's scientifically proven that you can change your habits in 21 days.
Right.
Um, it doesn't make it like just like boom, it's done, but like you have to make a decision every morning, like to do those habits, to do those things, not like, oh, I'm going to do this instead, or I'll
Right.
let it slide today and those kind of things. But I mean, the the formation of daily habits, like, and I I like to talk about it like this, like, okay, here's who I am, here's who I want to be. I want to be a state champion. I want to be a great father. I want to be a great coach. I want to be a relationships coach. I want to be a good teammate, whatever that may be. Well, what are the things that I have to do on a daily basis to be that thing?
Mhm.
Well, if I'm not that right now, what are those things that I need to do? And then I just need to say, that's going to be who I am now. Now, is there going to be times where I'm going to have to make the decision to be like, oh, I'm right in between. Like I could go be that person or I could be revert back to my other way of doing things. Heck
Mhm.
yeah. But I'm not giving there is a choice, but there's really not a choice, right?
Right.
Like if I want to be this, and I have the choice to many times throughout the day make the choice to either bring myself to that and do the things I need to be here or not make that choice. But
Right.
really, if I really want to be here, I don't really have that choice.
Yeah, it's
Like
like the
I'm
sacrifice thing. You have to you're gonna have to sacrifice things, right? We always talk about that here too. It's if you wanna be great, you don't have a choice on, how you live your lifestyle. Like you live the championship lifestyle or you just don't. Like there's no middle ground because the middle ground's not gonna get you anywhere, really. Um, but yeah, I mean, kind of like thinking about that and the fact of, you're talking about how you're doing everything. And honestly, the choice isn't a choice anymore because you already built that habit over time, right? Like you've made the decision, like you said, let's say 100 days in a row, right? Well, then on that 101st day, it's not like using your brain to be like, okay, I have to make this choice again. It's like, no, your brain just knows that you have to do it. So the choice is gone, right? Like,
This is who I
um,
am.
right. That's just who you are. You kind of built yourself into being that person, right? Like,
This is my
um,
new norm. We talk about that. I'm reading a book with one of my mentors right now called "Win the Day" by Mark Batterson, and it's about building habits,
mhm,
um, and it's the last chapter was a new talked about being having a new normal. Like
mm,
this was my normal, and after I do these habits day after day after day after day, and now I'm this is my new normal, and now I reach for the next new normal,
yeah,
like
yeah.
that's
It's
just who I am. That's just I've decided that I'm gonna be this person
mhm.
and I'm going to like, am I gonna have setbacks? Of course, right? Like that happens all the time. But like, oh, that wasn't right. I'm gonna make that decision again. And then after doing that for so long, now you're a new person. You have a new normal. The new has come, the old is gone, and here we go.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things that I mean, don't get me wrong, Trevor, there's a long list of favorite things that you've said to me, but one of my favorite things that you've ever said, I think, is, you gave up being normal a long time ago, right? Like, when you started wrestling, when you started competing, you gave up being normal a long time ago, and that's, something that I always, always remembered even when I was competing. It's like, why would I wanna be normal? Like, when I see kids that wanna go out and, party or go out and, give up their sports to go to, like, a state school and just not do anything, like, why would you wanna just be normal like that, Like, you only have this short time in your life where you could compete at a certain level, and it's like, even now that I'm done competing, right, like, I wish I had 8 years in college rather than 4, right? Like, I wish I had the chance to, go back and do it again, whatever, but it's like you wanna go to a state school or you wanna go and just party and then what? Like, just do that for the rest of your life as well, right? Like, now that I kind of went through 4 years of competing in college, now I'm just like not really in the adult life either wanting to do those things that a lot of kids in college did. You know what I mean? Like now it's just not a part of my daily actions or my daily life or what I look forward to doing. And a lot of times it is for kids, right? Like, but yeah, it's like, why would you want to be normal? And I think that we talk about that a lot here too. Like I said, Jared, my boss, he's always saying that. Like, I don't understand why people, and he competed at a high level, right? Like he was on, he was a backup for the US national team for Olympic weightlifting. Like he's been there and he's kind of experienced it before, but he just can't wrap his head around how people want to just like give up on themselves, one, and also just be like an average person every single day. It just doesn't make any sense, you know?
Well, I mean, we all know this, but it's not easy,
Hmm.
right? And that's a lot of times why people don't do it or don't want to do it. But you're right. Like I've made the decision a long time ago that I don't want to be normal.
Hmm.
I don't want, hey, what do you think about Coach Kittleson? I don't want people to be like, yeah, he's just normal.
He's just a good dude, like whatever. Like he's just, yeah,
Yeah, I want those things. Like but like, man, I'm hoping that I can instill something where they're like, man, he always held me to these expectations. He's a little crazy. Like,
right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's
if
funny
I'm
because we
not,
just had a
I'm not gonna be
conversation.
like, God.
Right, exactly. We just had a conversation about that. It's like, yeah, you have to if you want to be good at anything, and this is like a clip that we had from our last podcast, I think, but it was like you have to be a little crazy. You have to be a little mentally off, like to be successful. I mean, everyone who is successful, I guarantee, will tell you the same thing. Like whether it means you're staying in the office for, you know, 13 hours straight, right? It's crazy, but it's worth it at some point. Or, you know, I know for me when recruiting wise, like when I was going out to recruit, like it's hard to freaking go to 6 tournaments in one weekend, right? Like you wake up at 5 a.m., you leave, and then you don't get back until midnight, and then you wake up and do the same thing again, right? And like you're traveling all day, you're talking to people, you know, you're hardly eating, you're just drinking a bunch of caffeine. Like it's just an unhealthy like habit at some point. But like I'm serious. Like I literally think I drank like 900 milligrams of caffeine when I recruited a day. It was just horrible. Like the reins
Yep.
were just at that point. Um, but it's like that was something that's crazy to people, right? And the people that like couldn't believe that you would do that or that someone would do that. But it's also why, you're in the position that you're in now. You're coaching the number one team in the country, and all that hard work. And now you just know that's a part of what you have to do in order to be a good coach, right? And like that's the habits you have to build. And it sucks. Like everything that's hard is gonna suck, right? And we always preach like simple versus easy. Everything just because something is simple might seem simple doesn't mean it's going to be easy to do, right? Like I can
Ooh,
say
that's
like,
good.
okay, yeah, I'm going to go out and be the best. I'm going to be a great coach, right? That's simple to say. It's a simple thing, but like it's hard, right? It doesn't mean it's easy for me to attain that thing, right? So, look at that. I'm just dropping some knowledge on you right now. You can use that to your athletes. Yeah.
It's not
Actually,
simple. It
I'll
might
shout
be
out.
simple. It's not going to be easy.
I'll shout out Jared on that one. He told me that one, but
Like
yeah, I
that,
mean,
Jared.
it's it's very, very true though. It's just like, people fear. I think failure is the biggest thing that they fear. So when they say they're going to do something, if they know they can't actually do it, or if they don't, aren't willing to actually do it, then it makes them kind of look dumb. And I think people kind of just, you know, say things and kind of suppress people's feelings about how, or like almost try to paint a picture of themselves to people, right? Like, oh, I'm going to be this guy. And then when it comes down to it, they just fear the fact that they're going to have to work really hard for it. So it kind of just doesn't happen ever. And a lot of times that happens with athletes, and it's like one of the worst things to see as a coach, right? Is somebody who has a lot of potential that doesn't really ever figure it out. And I'm sure you see that all the time still, right? Like you probably have guys on your team that, could be national champions if they figured it out, right? And it's just like
Out.
you can only lead a horse to water, right? And like that's all you can do at that point. And you can give them 100%, like you said, and you're all in. But at the end of the day, it comes back on them. And um, I think, like you said, having the culture already set in place at Wartburg, like Keller, I mean, even before Keller, it was a thing, right? Like Wartburg has been a winning program for a very, very long time. But you know, you were able to kind of walk into that situation already knowing the kind of the same things that they do, which is makes it easy. I feel like you said, you're fitting in really, really well there, but it's mostly because you guys are already on the same like playing ground when it comes to how to coach and your coaching style, right? which is crazy. By the way, Wartburg and Loris were rivals when we were at Loris, and now Kit coaches there. So, um, and now I'm a huge Wartburg fan. So go Knights. But
I'm
um,
not, I'm not
yeah, but yeah. So last little thing here, I guess, but then I'll let you go. But going on to kind of Wartburg in general, I kind of want to talk about um, kind of the opportunities that you're giving athletes there. As far as like the strength and conditioning program, I hear like a lot of good things about it, right? I know you guys have a lot of like one, nice facilities, two, a lot of amenities. Like I know you guys have those iPads where it tracks like certain velocities or something like that, right? And um, you guys have like combine days even for football, like NFL combine days and stuff like that. So going back to the D3 versus D1 thing, like what is Wartburg offering? And this is for any athlete, right? This is not just for wrestlers, but that's different from D3, other D3 schools, one, and two, also like that kind of separates them in the fact of they are just a smaller version of a D1 school essentially.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of talked about it, but I mean, our weight room was our excuse me, our athletes weight room, athletic weight room is opened in 22, 21. And so it's a brand new experience in there, and they did a great job doing it. Um, and you talked about the iPads that we have, so it does, and we have cameras, so
Mm,
you can go. I mean, you can watch technique on your lifts,
mhm,
or we use it a lot for tracking velocity and acceleration. What we do, so specifically for wrestling right now, like you talked about lifting during season, our lifts look a little bit different right now, obviously, than they did in the preseason or in the summer, right?
yep,
But a lot of what we do is we track velocity. We want to be explosive through the season still,
mhm,
um, and so it's not so much about here's my max and I'm going to hit this many reps of a percent of my max. It's more about I want a weight that I'm going to be able to be explosive with, and so it tracks us through the cameras and it can show bam, you hit your velocity rank or it didn't. And you get real time feedback from that. Okay, maybe I need to take a weight off. Maybe I'm feeling a little down today. Maybe whatever that is, I can make in moment adjustments from that, and I think that's we started really implementing that last year, and I feel like
mhm,
had a huge impact for us. Our strength coach, Ethan Hayes, a Warburg graduate, came back and took the head strength coach here, and man, he is the man. He's got energy that he brings, to the weight room, which is another huge thing.
mhm,
As you know, like bringing energy to a weight room and doing, and he knows, and he didn't know, being specifically, like he wasn't a wrestler, like he didn't know what wrestling needed, but he dove deep and learned and figured it out. And we have some connections in the wrestling world, and we all got together, and figured out like, okay, here's how we want to structure our lifting program
mhm.
and how it's specific for wrestling. And, and everybody's an individual too, some guys need to gain weight right now, or
Right.
some guys need to gain muscle right now, still, even during season. And some guys are going to be on the opposite end of that, and so, um, just being able to him being flexible and wanting to work with our guys individually like that is huge. And the facilities that we have and able to do the things that we do like that, it's just it adds to a culture of what already is the expectation here at Warburg, and that's not even just in wrestling, but across the board. Like, and that's what I've kind of come to learn. I've always wondered what was different, coaching against them for so long.
Yeah,
Like,
you're good. Yeah. I mean, there's a
it's
reason why they're good, right?
is everybody on campus is on the same page, from
Mm,
the administration to the strength and conditioning to the athletic training to, like, we're gonna take this red tape out of the way for you so that you can be the best that you can possibly be, and
mhm.
um it's been pretty awesome to figure that out and learn that and be part of it and experience it.
Yeah, it's cool that I mean, especially with wrestling, like it's such a unknown sport, I feel like, to a lot of people, to the general population, right? Like a lot of people don't know how wrestling works or the ins and outs of it. And, then you factor in cutting weight and you factor in all these other things that other sports don't necessarily have, right? Like football players, they just lift to, gain muscle, to get big, to, you know, be athletic still. Obviously, there's a lot more moving parts, but for wrestling, it's hard. It's like, okay, you have to maintain a certain weight while also maintaining a certain strength and athleticism, and um, so like having somebody like you said that kind of can dive into that and um, kind of learn as well. And I'm sure like learning about it is probably one of like the most fun things that he's able to do because now he can watch your guys too and like go to wrestling meets and see, what it actually is rather than just working on the back end of it and kind of just, worrying about the strength part of it. And, that's cool for anybody. Even me, there's times where I have golfers, there's times where I have tennis players, I have basketball players, right? And like, dude, I'm horrible at basketball. I couldn't tell you a single thing about basketball. I mean, that's just, I was a wrestler for a reason, right? Like, no one says wrestlers are super athletic, right? Like, that's just how it works. But I'm learning so much more about other sports, like tennis. Like, dude, I've watched tennis more times since I've started working here than I probably ever have in my entire life. But I have tennis players, and I'm trying to watch what the top guys are really good at, right? Like, what makes them so good. And it's just always kind of learning that aspect of things. Um, but yeah, that's super, super cool. And I've kind of follow you guys obviously on social media and I kind of see what you guys are doing weight room wise and all that good stuff. But what are you guys doing in season? Like, is it a couple times a week or I just mostly want all of our athletes to hear how many times you guys are working out strength conditioning wise in season because it seems to be like the hardest thing for every athlete that we coach is, oh, I can't believe I have to go lift for an hour. It's like, it's not that bad, honestly, but
Yeah, we are so in season right now. We go twice a week during season, and
mhm,
honestly, the lifts are probably 25 to 30 minutes somewhere
yeah.
in there. They're pretty upbeat in their pace, and so uh, we still hit all of the major things and then some auxiliary stuff, right? And we're doing some things to help with making sure our knees and our shoulders and all of that stuff is staying on point health wise, right? And strength wise. But we're trying to maintain that strength that we had, at the beginning of the season and keep it going throughout. And there'll be times where we might even like Coach Hayes, he's been great to work with again, just because like we've talked about here, we want to peak for this, and this, right? And so he helps set the plan to be able to peak for those things, and he'll adjust as we go with different things. And like I said, there are some guys that are lifting 4 or 5 times a week actually because they need extra muscle right now. They're not really having to maintain or um, cut weight at all. They need to go the opposite way. And so we have different guys on different programs too, and so everybody's a little bit individualistic in that sense. And we're going to do whatever is best for you as an individual. But
Mhm.
as a team, we lift twice a week. So
Yeah, and we're using the wrong terminology right now. It's weight management. We've been saying cutting weight way too much today, actually. Like, not a
yeah,
fan of cutting weight. Nobody's a fan of cutting weight. It sucks. But weight management is the
man,
right
man,
route.
it's a choice, honestly. Weight management's a choice.
Yeah,
Choosing
makes it a lot.
choosing to follow a plan.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I there's a couple wrestlers that come here even that cut weight during season, obviously, like and um, they're still showing up and they're still doing the things that are necessary. And but yeah, it's like I'm still telling him, it's like, no, dude, you're not cutting weight. Just manage your weight, and then you're not gonna have that feeling of cutting weight, right? Like you don't want to feel cutting weight. Cutting weight is not a good feeling, but if you can just manage it, right, like it's completely different. It's a completely different feeling. But alrighty, for real, last question. I just need to get this off. But give me three things that you are looking for in a recruit or in an athlete when you are recruiting that makes them stand out to like compared to other athletes or compared to just the general population of athletes.
Well,
I
let's
know
just
it's a
start
loaded
here.
question, but
No, that's
there's
all
a
right.
yeah.
Let's just start here. Like, number one, like across the bare minimum here is like you do good in school, you work hard, you show up, like those are the bare minimum things,
Mhm.
right? Like those aren't even like, oh, I'm looking for kids that work hard. Well, yeah, of course, those are the bare minimums,
Right.
right?
Expected, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and so like just there is a big thing. I think a couple things that I've seen that makes kids stand out is uh, their demeanor on some things, the way they handle themselves, the way they handle, and specifically for wrestling a little bit, but the way they handle themselves in big situations, right? In big matches, are they are they afraid? Are they calm, cool, collected? If something goes wrong, do they pout about it? Do they complain? Do they blame? Um, do they take responsibility for their actions? Do they take responsibility for something that happened? What do they do? How do they handle themselves when something out of their control happens? Right? Like, not to say that you can't change your mindset on these things, but it is a it is a little like, oh, mental note. Okay, I saw that, on some of these things, and the way they handle themselves with their teammates, the way they handle themselves with their coaches, like, can they be coached? The more I'm into this, the more I see, like, it's really hard for a kid who can't be coached in high school to learn to be coached in college.
Yeah, for sure.
If you're having a hard time being coached, it's really hard to change that's a stubborn habit to overcome. I'm not
Mhm.
saying it can't change, but
Right.
it's just a little marker in the back of your head of like, oh, okay, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so I look at a lot of that right now. And then you always want to talk to coaches and talk to people, and like they'll tell you what some, like, without telling you, they can tell you like the habits of a kid, right? And
Yep.
again, can things change? Yes, but that student athlete is going to have to make those decisions to change those things, and more times than not, if you're not making those habits in high school, it's really hard to make those habits and change those things when you come to college.
Right. So it's almost like obviously the skill being a good athlete is all part of getting recruited, right? That's obviously the base level too. But you're more so looking outside of just, the skill, outside of how many times they win or lose or how many times they win tournaments, right? Like that's just obviously you're recruiting high level wrestlers. That's what you want. But you're more so looking at the fact of what they're doing, the outside factors, right? Like when they're warming up or when they're with their teammates or when they're around their family or when they're talking to their coaches, whatever that may be. I think that's a big thing that kids need to realize too is like you can be a very, very good athlete. Like you could be the number one athlete in the country for sure. Go ahead. But if you are not a good person, or if you are not, willing to keep learning, or if you feel like you're above everybody, and you carry yourself like that, it's going to turn coaches away. It's going to turn coaches off from you 100%. Like I know that I've seen really good athletes, even, whether it's here or, when I was recruiting, whatever, um, they're very, very good at their sport, but also like, you go up and talk to them and they're just like, they don't want to talk to you or they don't feel like they even you deserve their time or whatever it may be, right? Like that kind of just makes me not want to recruit that person, right? Like it just is a little bit different than what people kind of perceive recruiting as, I think. And I think they believe that if they're just good at their sport, that's going to get them wherever they want to go, right? And um, which that's fine, but if you're not going to go professional in your sport, like it's a very small percentage of people that do, then you're gonna have to be a person outside of athletics. And even if you're becoming a coach, like we said, it's a different mindset. It's a different switch that you have to like kind of flip in your brain towards not athlete mode anymore. It's a mentor and it's a coach and it's a just a person. Um, but for me, I think trying to preach, everything that you're doing on the field or on the mat or on the court is great. But if you're not doing the right things outside of it, then it doesn't really matter. And coaches are going to see that. And um, just as important as winning competitions are, if a coach calls me about a kid and they're in here and they're complaining about doing everything and they have a bad attitude about everything, it's like it's hard for me to be like, you know what, yeah, you should recruit this kid because they're giving me everything that they everything that I ask. They're not, because they're complaining or they're dragging or they're not excited to be here. Like um being grateful for the opportunities is something that a lot of kids need to learn, I think. And it's hard to learn. Like it's easier said than done, right? Another simple versus easy thing. It's easier said than done a lot of the times to convince people that they need to be grateful for something that's hard. Um, but at the end of the day, it's like your parents. are giving you the opportunity to come to this place and, do extra work to make you successful, right? Like, it's not just how good you can be at your sport. It's also all those other things that go into it. So that's definitely a good point for everyone to remember. But all right, Trevor, gonna cut this off here. We've been rambling on for a while now, but is there anything else that you would like to add or say just to kind of cap this thing off?
Yeah, my turn to ask you a question.
Okay.
What is one or a couple of the biggest things that you learned going from an athlete to a coach? Um, yeah, let's just leave it open ended at that.
Okay. The biggest things that I learned from like the transition from athlete
Yeah,
to coach. Huh. I would say the biggest one, which is you already kind of said, it's not about me. Like, I think that people are starting to realize this a lot more now because you got to think I'm in a different world now, right? Like, I'm not just in wrestling, so
yep,
I'm surrounded by a lot of different people now. But now that wrestling season has started, like every single day of my life, I'm not getting home until 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m., 9, whatever it may be, because I'm going straight from here to wrestling practice. I'm going to tournaments on the weekends to watch girls compete. I'm doing all that stuff, right? So, um, right now, my life is centered around, my athletes. And honestly, it's all the time. It's not just right now. But I think the biggest one was, it's not about me anymore. And um, that has made me confident in my coaching abilities to know that it's not about me, because I don't stress myself out about being, the best athlete that I can be or being the best, bettering myself before others type of thing. I'm worried about getting those athletes to where they need to be, and accomplishing their goals. So that's one. Another one that I would say is it's give and take, like with athletes, right? Being a good coach involves giving a little and also taking a little. And, um, as an athlete, it's more take than it is give because you're just taking in a bunch of knowledge and you're taking in a bunch of things from coaches and different, partners. And but it's all about you, right? Like wrestling especially is an individualized sport that turns into a team sport, because you do well as an individual, but it's more so heavily focused on how you can improve yourself because it's only you versus another person. Um, but now I'm thinking like in a different aspect of I have to push kids to a certain limit, but I also have to be willing to give kids or take away a little from kids as well. I can't push them hard all the time. I can't run them to the ground all the time. Like I have to be able to listen to them too, right? Like, oh, did they come in? How are you feeling today? Like anything hurt, right? Like, are you feeling good mentally and physically, right? There's a lot of things that you have to go through as a coach that um, I feel like a lot of coaches skip, right? Like it's not just about the practice that you have for an hour and pushing that person as hard as you can for an hour. It's also like, okay, how are they doing as a person? How are they doing, feeling mentally and physically? And so I think that's another big one that I could say. And then finally, I would say to top off my top three here, um, I would say that being a coach doesn't mean that you are done learning. You know what I mean? Like I became the best wrestler that I've ever been in my entire life, right? Like I haven't competed in what 5 years now, 4 years, but I am the best. I can confidently say I'm the best wrestler, knowledge wise and technique wise, and everything. Now that I've been in a coaching setting, like I learned so much more. But it's also, like you said, allowing yourself to learn more, right? Like I could have been done. I could have cut myself off after I was done competing. Like okay, I competed in wrestling for what 20 something years now. Like I know everything that I need to know about wrestling, and now I can just coach that way and coach kids to be exactly how I was, which is super unrealistic, right? Like I don't have a single wrestler that I coach or a single athlete that I coach that is exactly like me. It just doesn't happen, right? So I think the biggest one was being able to differentiate each individual and um, knowing that, like you said, even your strength and conditioning coach is learning about wrestling right now, right? And that's allowing him to become a better strength and conditioning coach for your wrestlers. And that's what I'm doing with different sports. But even wrestling, I'm still learning and I'm still watching wrestling and observing wrestling and becoming a better coach because of those things as well. So I think it's just not being stuck in your own ways and knowing that your way is not going to be the way for every athlete. And honestly, probably not a single athlete that you coach your way is not going to be the way. It's all just tailored to their way, right? Like you just tweak little things to make things fit them, and that's it. So yeah, I would say those are my top three. I probably sound exactly like you, shocker, but Um, yeah, so I would say those are the top 3 for sure.
Good. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're good. I mean, just one little quick thing. Probably the one of the very first lessons I ever learned on coaching was going off of your last point. I was in high school football and like I was like the hard worker, did everything right kind of thing, right? Had a little bit of a competitive drive to me on some things, right? But like the coach kind of chewed my butt on something and I'm like, what the heck? I didn't really do anything wrong. And
Mhm.
I was kind of pissed about it. And he pulled me in. He's like, do you know why I did that? I'm like, no, I was actually wondering exactly why you did that. Like, and he goes, well, I know that you can handle it.
Mhm.
And I know some of these other guys can't, but if they see you getting your butt chewed for something, then they're going to change the game on it uh, better than if I just chewed their butt on it.
Right,
And
right.
he told me every kid, he literally said at this moment, he goes, every single kid you coach or that is a different kid and not everybody can be the same and
Mhm.
coach the same. And like when I first got into coaching, I like remembered that firstly. So like that's kind of like my first lesson I ever remember on like this is how to coach is everybody's different and everybody's an individual and you can't not everybody nobody is actually like me and nobody is
Right.
going to be that way.
I think the biggest thing from that story is, like, the fact that he explained it, right? Like, a lot of coaches just they don't even take the time to explain why they're yelling at you or why they're screaming at you. Like, I think my biggest pet peeve when it comes to coaching, I always will live and die by this, but it's the guy that stands off to the side and screams and yells at kids and, like, doesn't go through the same grind as them or doesn't, live the same lifestyle that they're screaming about, right? Or they don't explain why, like, why am I getting yelled at? If you yell at a kid and they don't know why, like, they are just gonna be the most confused athlete ever, and that's just how it's gonna be, and you're just ruining their career by doing that. But if you're able to scream at them and then also calmly tell them, like, why you're doing that, right? It makes it a lot more meaningful, and it makes it seem like you care a lot more if you're a coach. As an athlete, like, if you're in the athlete's shoes, it makes them feel a little bit more comfortable with those things happening rather than, like, shutting down off of it. So yeah, I mean, like, the reason why you remember that now, even to this day, probably is because he did pull you in and explain it to you and walk you through why, he did that or why that was the thought process behind it. But
That's a great point. That is probably exactly why I remember that is because he pulled me in and talked to me about that, you know? And
yeah,
like what you said, like I might get on you as an athlete as from a coaching standpoint, but then I'm going to like hopefully because of the relationships and the trust level that we've built like we talked about earlier in the episode
mhm,
that you know that I'm coming at you from a place of love with this, but I'm also going to tell you that right away like listen, I'm holding you accountable here because I love you and I want what's best for you, right? Like
right,
we're we're trying to this is about helping you and that's it.
mhm,
And so
right.
hopefully they understand that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, alrighty, now we're officially. I'm cutting you off for real because we've won over. I think we're like an hour 15 right now. But no, this is awesome. I mean, I'm sure we'll do this again. We'll have you on again, and I want to kind of keep growing this thing a little bit more. Hopefully, we can get like you and Eddie on at the same time or something, so we can all just talk about some stuff and kind of bounce some ideas off each other. Because I've been looking forward to this episode. I've been telling Jared this too because there's just so much. Um, People are going to understand where I learned a lot of my coaching philosophies from after they're listening to this, right, or hearing the clips from this, and they're going to a lot of the athletes that watch are going to see, wow, like, okay, he learned that from a coach and that's why he's telling me this. And hopefully they kind of take that to heart a little bit more. But go ahead and keep doing what you're doing at Wartburg. People go watch Wartburg wrestling, do their thing. Number one team in the country. When you guys compete again this week?
No, we're off. We're off now until we have 2 weeks until our Vegas tournament that we host out in Las Vegas at the Flamingo. But and then we come back after Christmas break and have an open tournament. Then we go right into national duels. That'll be the next big one that we're peaking for and looking forward to.
Cool, cool. Yeah, so go check out Wartburg Wrestling. Go give him a follow on Instagram. Go follow Trevor Kittleson on Instagram. Um, but thank you for stopping in, giving us your time, talking on a Sunday morning with us, and hopefully we get to do this again soon for sure.
Appreciate you having me in, buddy.